Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Tyrell Gittens. I am the coordinator and editor of the Cropper Foundation's Cari-Bois Environmental News Network, and I am so very happy to welcome you to the seventh State of the Environment webinar. For those of you all who may be familiar, uh, all right, I am seeing someone. Could you all hear me clearly? I'm seeing Miss Lewis. Miss Lewis, can you hear me? Okay, great. All right, great. So, all right, great. Everyone can hear me. All right, great. So, as I was saying, for those of you all who are familiar with the webinar series, it's basically a space for us to discuss environmental issues across the Caribbean, but not just discuss the issues, but also discuss solutions and how we could be part of these solutions. So it is our seventh State of the Environment webinar, but it is our 12th webinar overall. We have had 7 under the State of the Environment series, 4 under our Climate Breakdown series, and 1 under the recently launched Convos with Lunchtime Convos with Cari-Bois series. We truly appreciate the support. We could not have done these webinars and have these discussions if you did not attend and support our webinar series. Again, this is a space where we want to share knowledge, discuss solutions, and inspire people to put those solutions into motion. And I see some of you all are introducing yourselves in the chat, which is lovely. So you could feel free to send a message and let us know who is here, which country you are from, if you are from any organization, which organization you represent, and you could maybe even just state what you are looking forward to this afternoon. So today, we are discussing our region's marine resources and what efforts are being done to protect those resources. So it is really the vision to take you on a story this afternoon. Our first presenter will shed a bit of light on some of the issues facing marine resources in Trinidad and Tobago and around the Caribbean. Then our second presenter will present the view of what action is being done to proactively help those issues and contribute towards the solutions on the ground, as well as how MEAs, as the title of the webinar suggests, influences those actions. Then our third presenter will explore some of the treaties and international, the multinational environmental agreements that are out there to protect our marine resources. So this year, and it is important to note that this year has been a very active year in terms of the amount of international conferences and efforts that are ongoing. We recently had the CID4 conference. I'm sorry about that. My phone did a little slide there. We had the CID4 conference earlier on this year. And of course, coming up to the end of the year, we have COP16 in Colombia and COP29 in Azerbaijan. And of course, we have conferences, in between those as well. So I am now excited to pass the floor over, of course, to the people who have come to hear this afternoon. So our first presenter is Mr. Joshua Prentice. Joshua Prentice is a passionate advocate for the environment with a background in ocean, climate, and geospatial science. He holds a BSc in biology, specializing in marine biology, ecology, and environmental biology. For his MSc in coastal and ocean management, Joshua's thesis focused on the impacts of plastic and other forms of marine debris and the impacts on mangroves in the Caroni watershed. He credits his love for the ocean and nature as the inspiration for pursuing a career dedicated to protecting and conserving our planet's natural resources. So before Joshua just begin, a few house rules. We do have a special section after all the presentations for questions. So you could feel free to either put your questions in the chat, write them down, or just ask when that segment begins. But in the meantime, we'd appreciate if we could keep your mics muted as well as your cameras off so we could keep attention on the main presenter. So Joshua, passing the baton to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tyrell. As with my presentation, I come on screen for a bit. Yeah.
Joshua, am I sharing for you?
Yeah, you're supposed to. Yeah.
No problem. Do that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So hello everyone. Everyone's hearing me, right? I would assume so. Yeah. So hello everyone. My name is Joshua Prentice. I am currently working with the Environmental Management Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. You can see one of my shirts. So I'm with the public education unit, and I would like to share more about my past work as a ocean advocate and the status of various environmental issues within the Caribbean region, which is being threatened by a plethora of issues that I'll express upon. So next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, this is the content page. Next slide. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So as my colleague Tyrell expressed earlier, that's just a brief run of what I've done. But I've done a whole host of work with the United Nations Environment Program, the FAO, mostly MEAs that you hear about today, especially the BBNJ Treaty was negotiated under the United Nations. That's basically the framework and house for a lot of the MEAs and the various subgroups that sub-organizations that fall under them. So yeah, next slide, please. Yes, I've done a lot of different projects regarding biodiversity, various surveys of mangrove stands, transect surveys of biodiversity, surveys underwater and coral reefs and marginal reefs. I've done coastal cleanups to sustainable ocean lands, Caribbean, various United Nations engagements for the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and also in my own capacity. And I've took part in various MEA negotiations for various regarding chemicals and waste. My main engagement avenue is United Nations Environment Assembly. I'll talk about more about that later in the presentation. BRS, Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm. Most MEAs I have some engagement on, but mostly the oceans and climate I know most about. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so beginning with just advocacy. This picture is from a deep sea mining capacity building campaign that was done with Sustainable Ocean Alliance. This was done in Jamaica. The reason for this is because one of the biggest issues that we have currently right now facing the Caribbean region is deep sea mining. Now, what is deep sea mining? Deep sea mining is basically the removal and use of equipment to mine/remove minerals from the ocean floor that can be then used for electric vehicles or other purposes. Now, how do these minerals form? Well, truth be told, these minerals form over an extremely long period of time. They're called nodules, and they're formed of mainly one type of mineral. Now, under sea, the pressure is extremely, extremely strong, and it takes millions of years for these nodules to form. It forms continuously. The center of it is theorized to be a piece of bone where any pressure and just over time by sheer coincidence, minerals start to attach it due to immense pressure, and then these form nodules. Now, as you can see, the race to clean energy has put a lot of pressure on this industry to find clean solutions and the formation of EV batteries to help push this new generation moving forward of clean energy. So it's a kind of it's a very big issue as a lot of industries are pushing for this exploitation of a resource. However, the main issue is that the negotiations taking place in Jamaica, that's where the ISA is headquartered. However, there reach implications of this as deep sea beds, deep sea ecosystems have yet to be fully explored, and we may miss out on critical uses for these biodiversity found down there. and also just the sheer destruction of ecosystems, because we have not found a way to fully harvest these nodules without doing extensive damage to the seafloor and by extension critical ocean process that exists there. Next slide, please. This is another project that was done. It's called Anti-Synthetic Sea Report. A few of my colleagues there as well, Hannah Lotion from the IMA, Ray Admount from the EMA as well. So this project, we looked at the amount of marine debris found down the island of Trinidad and Tobago. You'll see in following slides the breakdown of the data we found. But this is just a 3-4 cleanup down the islands on Shakshkari, and as you can see, it's a pretty large amount of garbage. I think we found over 400 pounds. Now most the trash found here, we theorize come from 2 sources: people on party boats and people on boats just randomly disposing of rubbish and garbage indiscriminately, and also from transboundary waste from other countries. As we all know, the Gulf of Paria flows into the Caribbean Sea, and the currents are connected. And we have found trash that belongs in other countries, namely Venezuela, or even as far as higher up in the Caribbean chain, due to ocean currents pushing us. So go to the next slide, please. I don't have much time. Yeah, so you can see this a simple breakdown of your report results. Yeah, a large amount of it were single-use plastics, which is currently a very big issue in the Caribbean. I'll touch on that later. But I will say this: plastics, however, is a very big issue, but it is being tackled. We have various programs that currently exist. The IKEA program to recycle plastic bottles. We also have a lot of different NGOs popping up: Flying Tree Environmental Services, Swim Colors doing a lot of stuff around plastics. And the BCRC Basket Venture Regional Center is also doing a lot of work on plastics, where they are doing a plastic inventory of what's the plastics coming in and plastics leaving the country through import and exports, which is really interesting work. So yeah, it was really insightful project, and this is just data has found from us 3-4 hours. I mean, we have yet to use booms to fully collect plastic bottles or other forms of marine debris flowing from all the major fresh outflows of the country. Next slide, please. Yeah, so you see the pie chart to your left is the chart breakdown of on-land waste. And you see plastics dominated. Your plastic, glass, paper, aluminum, electronics, and miscellaneous. Now, miscellaneous may seem harmless, but trust me, it's not. We found a stove and a toaster and chairs, random nonsense that people dispose of because they felt lazy to take it. And this points to a bigger problem of the mindset and behavioral patterns of people in the country, because we can place so many laws into power. We can once the INC treaty is done, we can sign on to ratify it, but people need to buy into it. And this shows that even if there's laws, nobody's there to enforce it, and the people simply don't care about keep enforcing those laws themselves, or when people come before it. And the right is the underwater, and once again, plastics both underwater and land are the dominant form of waste found. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a picture from UNEA 6 earlier this year in Nairobi, where I was part of the Trinidad and Tobago delegation, and I took part in a side event regarding a youth side event regarding the UNEP's engagement in ocean and seas governance. Now, even though there are a lot of a lot of ocean-related MEAs, UNCLOS, and now BBNJ is strengthening that. UNEP itself has a very strong program called the Regional Seas Program. You may have heard of some of the programs that they administer. It's called like the Cartagena Convention based in Jamaica, that focuses on solid waste and in the marine environment. But basically, Regional Seas Program by far and away is the most successful program for ocean governance globally. UNEP administers it, and there are 13 administered regional seas where UNEP works. And this was to strengthen it because at UNEP 6, there's a resolution to strengthen UNEP's engagement in ocean and seas governance. This side event was meant to push that and really get into minds of people in attendance. In attendance, we had the French Deputy Permanent Representative, Clement Payor, And he the reason he's there is because France sponsored resolution. France at a point in time, I think they are doing the ocean conference for next year. I think I could be mistaken about that. So France has always been on the side of pro environment, and they see oceans governance is as a very important issue. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll talk about some major marine issues affecting the Caribbean. Number one primary thing, sargassum. Now, sargassum is something that affects multiple sectors, multiple industries. Sargassum itself is a seaweed that has been pushed into overdrive due to climate change, due to human factors as well, such as nutrient runoff from various countries, and also global warming, creating a warming ocean, a prime environment for sargassum to grow. Now, the issue with sargassum is that once it washes up on our shore, is once it starts to decay, it releases sulfur gas. It would smell absolutely horrible. Now, in a country such as Tobago or Trinidad, where there's a lot of tourism on the coastline, it affects the tourism drastically because tourists want to walk on a beach where one, they can't move mechanically due to sargassum being there, and two, it smells really bad, like rotten eggs. It's not a good smell. So the main issue that is affecting the Caribbean is that countries are struggling to find a way to, one, remove the sargassum, and two, what to do with it. You can't just take sargassum and just dispose it anywhere, because sargassum has been found to hold a lot of heavy metals and other harmful chemicals once broken down that will affect and leach into the environment and affect like a knock-on effect onto other environments. So it's a very big issue that in Trinidad and Tobago right now, there was a sargassum task force that was appointed. I know today the sargassum task force was reappointed with, I think, most members, original members, still there. And there are a lot of industries now and businesses popping up trying to use sargassum. I know in Barbados, they've been doing sargassum wine, drying up sargassum to turn into different products. I know I Movement did a lot of work with sargassum, using it as a nutrient but keep the soil moist in rehabilitated areas for the iWeco project, which aims to rehabilitate old quarries. Additionally, we have deep sea mining, like I spoke about earlier. Overfishing is a very big issue. I'm sure all of you all who eat fish realize over time growing up, the fish are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This has been due to fishing pressure, putting a lot of stress in fish and force them to be at a smaller size at the age of maturity to reproduce, to keep the population strong and to reproduce. They wouldn't be able to get to the original size to mate with other fishing species to produce strong offspring. So the fish end up getting smaller and smaller. And also the fishermen use indiscriminate techniques that catch juvenile fish, small fishes, and it just causes the population to somewhat collapse. Now they have been trying to get fisher folk involved to get a whole list issue, but in my opinion, it's somewhat of a lost cause. There needs to be a lot done for this issue, and the ironic thing is that the people that depend on livelihood, like we have an artisanal fishery, means that it's a small scale fishery with just less resources. These people depend on the fisheries, but they don't want to take care of it. They just want to exploit it. And when the fisheries collapse and they have not catch any fish anymore, what are they going to do? That's not a social problem. They'll just call the government and say, well, we need help. You should have been helping yourself. There's another thing too. In the marine environment, when we help the environment helps us. You can't keep exploiting it over and over again and expect nothing to happen. Once again, plastics in any Caribbean country use these single-use plastics. I know a few Caribbean countries have banned the use of single-use plastics. Trinidad and Tobago, however, is not one of them. It's coming along. Plastics have lots of various effects on wildlife, birds, turtles, coral reefs. Birds and turtles mistake plastic for food. A lot of birds have been found to be dead with plastics in their stomach because they can't digest it. Turtles themselves, they feed on jellyfish. They think plastic bags in the water are jellyfish that they would eat. They put mechanical stress on coral reefs by blocking sunlight, which leaves them susceptible to diseases, and as well as just one of the major ones. Well, there's aesthetically. Like nobody wants to visit beaches that are covered in plastic or use the marine environment. So it is a use factor as well for humans and people. Pollution in other forms, such as how to put it, um pollution running off from agricultural lands, from pesticide use. What they might explain that you can't have pesticides running off into water indiscriminately. Some techniques used to help have that are vetiver stands. They have been shown to absorb some pesticides and other heavy metals have been used. Additionally, just green pesticides. You don't need to use very toxic compounds, but they've been shown green, clean pesticides that keep pests away. And lastly, due to climate change, ocean acidification and warming. Now, ocean warming is a very big issue that has drastic impacts for our climate and life as a whole. And ocean acidification due to so basically the ocean is basic in senses, has a lot of carbonates in it, which are used to form coral reefs. Now, once carbon dioxide is due to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere enters the water, it's a reversible reaction, but it forms a weak carbonic acid once it enters the water, and then this carbonic acid has very much knock-on effects on corals, because you put a base in acid, it breaks it down. So these cause weakening and destruction of corals, and also it has effects on shellfish and crabs because they use calcium for their shells. So it forms weakened shells that this in turn cause shellfish not to grow properly. Ocean acidification and ocean warming. I'll go into the next slide about the global conveyor belt and why ocean warming is very bad. So next slide, please. Right, wonderful. This is a very simplified picture. I don't want to confuse it too much, but this is the global ocean conveyor belt. If you don't if you don't know what that is, basically it's a entire 1,000-year circulatory system for the oceans, just like our bodies. We have deoxygenated blood, except our blood circulates in a few seconds. This takes on average 1,000 years. Now, warm, shallow water, oxygen-rich water, sorry, not water, flows on the surface or going from the Horn of Africa all the way up to the Caribbean. And it goes all the way north and all the way south as well. Now, the warm water enters the pools, and then because cool water is from a state of matter, it's much thicker. The warm water sits on top, and once it gets to the pools, it gets cool and then slowly sinks to the bottom. And at the bottom, it picks up nutrients, and it's a basically nutrient cycle, and also helps thermoregulate the oceans. And this has impacts on hurricanes and other important ocean processes such as upwellings. Now, due to ocean warming, you may now understand what I'm talking about, because if the cold water at the bottom starts getting warmer, that has knock-on effects because the water won't be able to circulate properly. Everything will just be the same temperature as a monotype, like completely throughout the ocean, which will be extremely bad because there'll be no movement and no currents, which will then in turn lead to population destruction on biodiversity that exists there, because they depend on the nutrients provided by this entire circulatory process, and it impacts for storms and hurricanes and rainfall patterns. And this is probably the biggest issue to me on climate change that people rarely speak about, because ocean and climate health is inexplicably linked. And if this collapses, we are in for a very terrible time. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is coming down to the end of my presentation. These are some stands and solutions. So on deep sea mining, global youth have continually called for moratorium, which means that a pause in deep sea mining until proper science has taken place on this matter. And on climate change, there needs to be a strong response from the global community. CARICOM has been doing a lot of work on climate change and getting preparations done for it. And some solutions that youth have been, and just overall that people should look at regarding the issues going in the region: data, fisheries data, and the people that use and exploit fishery in the Caribbean are few and far between. So we push for fishing licenses, new fishing licenses, where the persons fishing, where they're fishing, and the amount they catch will be recorded, and also a cyclical process for fishing seasons for commercially important species, because a lot of species exploit kingfish, redfish, salmon. They have different spawning and breeding seasons. And we believe that a cyclical process where over a period of time where these species breed, they wouldn't be able to be caught and sold at the local markets or traded from Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that they get a chance to populate and reproduce. And lastly, the funding of sargassum research and circular processes. A lot of businesses are coming and research needs to be conducted on how to use sargassum, because the thing is, it's here and it's happening and we cannot just ignore it. We need to find ways to use it and use it well. So that's one way. So next slide, please. And that brings me to my presentation. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to any question near the end. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for that very insightful presentation. Joshua, as a region that relies so heavily on our oceans, our seas, our marine resources, I think you did an incredible job capturing the issues facing our marine resources. And our next presenter will no doubt touch on some of that, but will also now give a perspective of what is being done on the ground to combat some of these issues. So moving right along, and again, if you have any questions for Joshua, you could feel to place them in the chat. We'll get to them at the end of the session, or just wait until the Q&A segment when you could unmute yourself and, also ask whatever question you may have. And I'm sure after that presentation, people may have some questions. So Miquel Garcia is a wildlife conservationist with 7 years experience working on sea turtle and marine conservation projects across the Caribbean. Graduating with an MSc in Integrated Coast and Ocean Management from the University of Trinidad and Tobago, he is currently the Antigua Marine Conservation Program Coordinator at the Environmental Awareness Group, which is one of the longest standing environmental NGOs in Antigua and Barbuda. Using his passion for the marine environment as a foothold, Miquel plans to be one of the driving forces within the region, pushing forward the ideas of sustainability, conservation, and love for oceans that we all call home. So Miquel, the floor is all yours. And Kyle, you will also navigate his presentation for him to answer.
Sure.
Okay. I'll start by saying thank you for the introduction and the invitation to participate in this webinar. So, as said, my name is Miquel Garcia. I'm the Antigua Marine Conservation Program Coordinator at the Environmental Awareness Group. We're NGO based in Antigua and Barbuda. So, yep, we could get right into it. So a quick introduction to the Environmental Awareness Group, the EAG. We are Antigua and Barbuda's oldest environmental NGO and has been at the forefront of conservation work within the islands for over 30 years. Our tagline is for the benefit of people and wildlife, and we have 3 core programs. We have the Offshore Islands Conservation Program, we have the Redonda Ecosystem Reserve, and then the Antigua Marine Conservation Program. And I'll go a bit more in depth into each one of them in a bit. Yep. So the general pillars of the Environmental Awareness Group are ecosystem-based endangered species conservation, invasive alien species management, education and awareness, and protected area management. So these are some of the core focuses that we gravitate towards at the Environmental Awareness Group. We're actively working with endangered species, we're working with sensitive ecosystems to important birding areas, to key biodiversity areas, and then we also do a lot of work within protected areas around Antigua and Barbuda, and we're actually the managing agency behind one of them. Again, I'll go a bit more in depth into that in a bit. Next slide. So just to give a more of an introduction into each one of our core programs. The Offshore Islands Conservation Program was one of the first programs at the EAG that kind of kicked off everything with the conservation of the Antigua racer. So originally, EAG has been more of a land-focused, island-focused conservation organization where around Antigua and Barbuda, there are 51 offshore islands, and we saw issue specifically with the Antiguan racer, where it was previously one of the world's most endangered snakes. That was its title. The population in the wild was at 30 left. It's an endemic species to Antigua. There were 30 snakes left in the wild around the world. And then through the efforts of EAG by reintroducing them onto offshore islands and keeping those islands rat and invasive species free, we were able to bump up those populations from the initial 30 to 1,000. And we're still doing ongoing surveys to manage the population of this critically endangered and endemic species towards Antigua and Barbuda. So what this work has led us to doing is a lot of invasive species control and monitoring. So rats, mongoose, in some cases goats, we manage these species and allow the environment by the removal of these invasive species that have a detrimental impact to the natural environment. By removing them, we're able to allow the ecosystem to breathe and to be able to rebound. So just by removing rats, mongoose on some of the offshore islands, we're able to see huge increases in the nesting bird populations, our Antiguan racers doing well, and then on islands like Redonda, you start seeing it's creating a safe haven for seabirds, seabird nesting colonies, the endemic lizard species on the island, and then those would have trickle-down impacts into the surrounding marine environment just through how good the land is doing. So the Offshore Islands Conservation Program is focused on some of the many offshore islands operating within the Northeastern Marine Management Area, which is a large protected area in Antigua and Barbuda. So next slide. Next up is the Redonda Ecosystem Reserve. So this is a picture of what Redonda used to look like. I'm going to show a more updated picture in a bit. So remember, this is what it would have looked like just a few years ago. It was classified as a moonscape. There was barely any vegetation, and this was due to, again, rats, mainly rats and goats acting as invasive species that basically ate everything on the island, from the birds coming into nest to any vegetation and plant life, and it really became a dead environment. Through the work of EAG, we were actually able to remove the invasive species, and just from doing that, the island started to rebound. You had an influx of new vegetation coming in, and with more vegetation, more trees growing on the island, you had huge returns of migratory seabirds, different seabird colonies, and the populations of the endemic lizard species on the island also rebounding. With that rebound, you have an increase in the nutrients being produced. So Redonda it was initially used as a guano mining island just because of how high the nesting seabird populations were. There were very high amounts of guano on the island. As a result of all the mining, the introduction of invasives, most of that was lost, and then the surrounding ecosystem suffered because of that. Because of the work EAG has done, you have a return of the seabirds, you have a return of nutrient inputs, and not just, so there's a difference between nutrient inputs where you have inorganic fertilizers that you might be coming from washing offshore as runoff from farms, and then you have another one which is a natural input of nutrients from seabirds. So the nutrients from seabirds, therefore, there's a lot of research showing that they directly the kind of nutrients that are easy for coral reefs, for corals to uptake and healthily grow, for seagrass beds. So just by removing rats, we were able to restore not only the land environment of Redonda, but also we're starting to see a positive change in the marine environment of Redonda. Next slide. And then for my program, the Antigua Marine Conservation Program, we are dedicated towards ecosystem-based protection, but our species of focus is the various species of sea turtles that inhabit around Antigua and Barbuda. So we have 3 nesting species, the hawksbill, green, and leatherback, and then we also have another species within our water, the loggerheads. So the AMCP program is dedicated towards sea turtle conservation, but not just the sea turtles, the entire ecosystems they exist around. So this one is more based on mainland Antigua, where we're doing mainly nest and beach surveys and trickling into in-water work. And as you do more in-water work, you identify the areas that sea turtles forage within. Then you start to identify, okay, they spend a lot of time around this coral reef. They spend a lot of time around this seagrass bed. And then you start building connective maps between the areas that they tend to frequent around the island, and then you build a cause for protecting the entire ecosystem, just because we know that this is a internationally protected IUCN endangered species. Next slide. So going a bit deeper into how multilateral agreements guide EAG's work. So being completely honest, the team on the ground is focused on what we do and what we love to do, which is species conservation. We love being out on the field. We love doing the work, doing bird checks, watching sea turtles come up to nest, active conservation. Our ethos at the EAG is doing something to make a change. So most of the time, our team is within the field actively engaging in the work that has to be done. There are several multilateral agreements that tie in very nicely with the work that we're already doing. In some cases, with like the Cunning Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, there are certain targets that we as the EAG are consistently hitting and that are our core focal points and areas. And I'll just point out some of these targets that we actively hit, and it's not just us hitting it to say that we are doing a checkbox. We're doing this. We're doing the conservation work in a way that supports any multilateral agreement the government buys into. So the government would always have their top-down directives of, okay, we need to put more work into conserving or identifying areas to conserve, or we understand that invasive species within the Caribbean is an issue. We need someone to do something about that. EAG is the organization that puts feet on the ground and actually does the work to make sure that these targets are hit. So target 1 is the planning and management of all areas to reduce biodiversity loss. We work not only around EAG, around Antigua, we work on the offshore islands, we work on Redonda, and we make sure to make this work as inclusive as possible to make sure that the volunteers, citizens of Antigua and Barbuda, interested tourists are all getting an ecosystem package and understanding the importance and work that goes into protecting and managing these areas, and then the importance of making sure that we keep these species around for the long term. The restoring degraded ecosystems. This is where our work on the offshore islands or Redonda it shines through the most, and it hits the target on the nose of restoring degraded ecosystems. We've learned through our 30 years of experience that in most cases, you just need to tweak the negative issues impacting the ecosystem. So just by removing rats and goats from Redonda, we didn't do any active conservation methods like replanting trees or reintroducing species. Just by removing the rats and goats, allowing the vegetation to return, you naturally saw the increases in the biodiversity of the area and the ecosystem health of the area. So just by identifying the key causes, the main impacting factors, and putting our heads together using our regional support and our international support networks, we're able to actively contribute towards the restoration of degraded ecosystems. And if you look at Antigua and Barbuda, in general, EAG is the leading organization, even as an NGO or non-governmental organization, we're the leading entity in the charge for Target 2. For Target 3 now, so the conserve 30% of land, water, and seas, so the 30 by 30 goal. Antigua and Barbuda has met the 30 by 30 goal, and the reason they met it is the designation of Redonda as a marine protected area, as an ecosystem reserve, where it's now one of the largest marine protected areas in the Caribbean, with as 30,000 hectares. We not only met the standard, we're also working towards ensuring that these areas are properly managed, because I mean, everyone here should know that just drawing a circle around a key area and saying it's a protected area, that's the first step. That's usually really hard to get done, but it's still only the first step. The steps that come after, proper management, monitoring, actually observing the ecosystem to ensure that, we protected this area, we know there are critical species within this area, and now the next steps is to ensure that we are actually we have a positive impact after drawing this protected area designation. So EAG is the managing agency. So as a NGO, we're the managers of this, and it's written into law in Antigua and Barbuda. And then halting species extinction. So our work directly with species like the Antiguan racer, which is an endemic species, like the hawksbill sea turtles, with leatherback sea turtles, screen sea turtles, with many of the nesting seabird populations, the West Indian whistling duck, the endemic species within Redonda. Through our work, we're actively halting species extinction. And then the introduction of IES, so invasive alien species, by 50%. Our work with creating biosecurity protocols for the offshore islands, for Redonda, ensuring that the offshore islands remain rat mongoose free, and allowing the ecosystems as themselves without those negative alien impacts to rebound and positively grow. So there are a lot of targets that we hit as the Environmental Awareness Group, as an NGO, who were not necessarily always on the policy, on the multilateral agreements. Usually it just trickles down to us to say, okay, this is something that the government has signed on to. These are targets that we hit to miss, and then the government asks EAG, okay, so what are you doing right now? And then they just go through the list of our current projects, and they have their boxes to tick, and they're reporting to the international community saying that these check boxes are being met. So this is to say that as a NGO, as feet on the ground, we're actively working, and by ensuring we do the work that we love, we're also making sure the island, the country, has the reputation of hitting the targets, excelling at the targets, and basically leading, in some aspects, leading the Caribbean in species conservation and protection. I'd also go a little bit further into this, where a lot of our work as an NGO, again, is funder dependent, and in a lot of the cases, just having knowledge of the wider multilateral agreements, just understanding what the agreements are and what targets we're actively hitting, it really helps us in securing funding. So it might be a bit crude to say, but following these multilateral agreements, ensuring that we're up to date with what is being signed on to, allows us to be able to get the funding to do the work we need to do as well. So you can go to the next slide. So this is just a bit of a bigger backdrop into Redonda. So it's almost a full 30,000 hectares of marine protected area where the land is, the land is a very small portion of that. It is one of the largest protected areas in Eastern Caribbean, and just the designation of Redonda has helped Antigua and Barbuda meet the 30 by 30 goal, and EAG is the managing agency. And if you think back of the moonscape picture you saw before, where it was just a brown gray rock, now you're starting to see, in the same image, you're starting to see trees popping up, you're seeing a little bit of vegetation coming up. Since doing the work on Redonda, we've seen a 2,000% increase of vegetation on the island itself, and that's just from, all we did was remove the goats and rats. And then you start seeing the 15 species of land being starting to return, the endemic species of lizards are exploding, and then you also have in and around 30 globally threatened species that live in and around Redonda. So as our route continues, so our first challenge was eradicating the invasive alien species. The second challenge was getting this area identified as a protected area. And again, we use multilateral agreements and frameworks like the CITES, CITES, where we help identify that, okay, we have endangered species here, we have endemic species here, and then we also have other frameworks and international, I wouldn't say agreements, but international legislation that helps us to identify, okay, this is a key biodiversity area. This helps us go back to the government and say, okay, you've signed on to this treaty, you accept that Antigua and Barbuda has X, Y, and Z key biodiversity areas. We have these important burden areas. We're signed on. The next step is, okay, how do we actually get these areas properly protected to ensure that the international reputation is, one, safe, and then two, that we actually have these species around for the long term. So next slide. A lot of the work we also do we touch a lot on migratory species. So back to Redonda. Redonda has regionally and globally significant colonies of seabirds, including brown boobies, masked boobies, red-footed boobies, the magnificent frigate bird, red-billed tropic bird, and it's internationally recognized as an important birding area. You also have it so that's on the land side, and then you also have it for sea turtles. We see greens, hawksbills, loggerheads utilizing the land around, and leatherbacks transitioning around the island, and then you also have it as an important cetacean area. So next slide. So just to quickly talk about the BBNJ and how we view it at the EAG. So the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, this high seas treaty allowing us to protect the areas outside of national jurisdiction. They have their 4 pillars. I'm sure Dr. Hassanali will speak a lot more about this. You have the secure marine genetic resources, the measures such as area-based management tools and marine protected areas, environmental impact assessments, and then capacity building. When you actually look, so I put the 4 pillars right next to a map of the jurisdictions within the Caribbean. And as you could see, most of us don't have any access to the high seas. We're all smushed together. We're all sharing borders. What importance is this treaty to us? So the previous slide talked a little bit about the migratory species, the species we work with. So you could go on to the next slide quickly. So the species we're talking about are sea turtles, the migratory birds, the cetaceans. We work with a lot of regional entities that attempt to protect these species of conservation concern, these endangered species, throughout the Caribbean. So with sea turtles, we work with the wider Caribbean Sea Turtle Network. With the migratory birds, there's Birds Caribbean. And with cetaceans, there's the Cetacean Conservation Society. While work across all our islands within the Caribbean region, these organizations touch all the islands and they ensure that, okay, sea turtles are protected from Trinidad to Antigua, going straight up to Nicaragua. But what about outside of these waters? Because these organisms share not only borders, but they also exist outside of national borders. Whereas the protection, the work we put into conserving sea turtles in Antigua and Barbuda is wonderful. But as soon as they leave our waters, maybe they go off to Dominica to forage. Okay, we have protected sea turtles in Dominica as well. But what about larger scale areas like the Sargasso Sea? We know when turtles are born, they hightail it to open ocean. They head out to the Sargasso Sea. That's one of the areas where they spend the first 2 years of their lives growing, living. There's no protection for these organisms outside of national jurisdiction. So a lot of the efforts that we put into protecting the seabirds, to preserving cetaceans, to helping out migrant seabird colonies and rejuvenating their populations, as soon as they get out of national jurisdiction or get into nations that don't have the proper protections for them, our work is diminished. So having that network of control both within the jurisdictions and then within these high seas where these populations are also existing, that helps to make sure our work stays relevant for the long term. Next slide. And that's the end of my presentation.
Wow, powerful stuff, Miquel, and there will no doubt be some questions during the Q&A segment. I think time and time again, we hear about the issues, but really, is there like a focus on the solutions that are being done and motivating people to start acting? So it's great to see the work that the AAG is doing, and something I really love that you do, which is the purpose of this webinar, as well as putting those global frameworks that we always hear about into a context that we could relate to. So again, sure that there are questions about that in the Q&A segment. So moving along now to Dr. Khalil Hassanali. Dr. Khalil Hassanali is a senior researcher at the Institute of Marine Affairs in Trinidad and Tobago, with over 10 years of experience in the field of marine policy and governance. He holds a BSc in Environmental Sciences from the University of East Anglia and MSc in Environment and Development from the University of Reading in the UK, and a PhD in Marine Affairs from the World Maritime University in Sweden. Dr. Hassanali has been involved in helping to shape global ocean governance, including through international agreements on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago. So Dr. Hassanali, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Terrell, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you all here today, and thanks for the previous presenters for really setting the scene and really making my work a bit easier. Let me start by first thanking the organizers for inviting me to be part of this webinar. It's really a pleasure. We don't have much time left, but hopefully I'll be able to get my points across in the remaining time left and leave some time for question and answer. So in my brief presentation today, I will be giving some insight into an international agreement which has been negotiated at the United Nations, which deals with conserving and managing biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and why really from a blue economy perspective, we as Caribbean countries and Caribbean people should be interested. We finalized the text of the agreement in March 2023 after years of negotiation and really adopted it in June 2023. I have been intimately involved in negotiating this agreement on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago and CARICOM, having been the Caribbean community's lead on environmental impact assessment, that element of the agreement. So just to give you an idea of the geographic scope of the agreement, Areas beyond national jurisdiction, or ABNJ, are the focus of the treaty. On the map, ABNJ is represented in dark blue. You can see that about 2/3 of all ocean space and about 45% of the area of the planet are areas beyond national jurisdiction. And it is really the location of some of the most unique, sensitive, and unexplored biological ecosystems, such as deep sea hydrothermal vents and seamounts. So beyond national jurisdiction, a patchwork of international bodies and treaties manage ocean resources and human activity. Now, many of these bodies are sectoral in nature, with few mechanisms really existing to facilitate communication and coordination between them all. And in addition, these bodies vary greatly in terms of their mandate and focus. Biodiversity conservation very often is not their main priority. So this piecemeal governance approach really led to the degradation of areas and resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And it makes deploying management and conservation tools challenging both legally and logistically. And so recognizing that the current regime for preservation and conservation of biodiversity found in areas beyond national jurisdiction was not ideal, the nations of the world embarked on a process aimed at making improvements. And that process was and is the crafting of the BBNJ agreement. The BBNJ agreement will be an implementing agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, and it really deals with the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. The letters highlighted in red denoting how the BBNJ acronym was derived. So we concluded the Intergovernmental Conference stage of negotiations in March 2023, and where we elaborated the text of the agreement. And the agreement was adopted in June 2023 and opened for signature in September 2023. CARICOM countries are very active in negotiating this agreement, and we negotiated as a bloc. So CARICOM countries united, and we came up with our positions, and we negotiated as a group. The middle picture there on the slide really shows a cross-section of some of the CARICOM negotiators in the agreement. So this slide just shows the timeline of the agreement negotiation. And as you can see, it took a lot of time to negotiate the actual agreement, starting with informal efforts way back in 2004. Just some major milestones along the way. In 2016, we had the PrepCom established, the preparatory committee, where we elaborated on elements of the agreement. Then this led to this, following on from this, we had the Intergovernmental Conference in 2017, starting in 2018, sorry. And that was supposed to be concluded in 2020, but COVID and other issues led to it being extended, and we actually, as I said, wrapped up the agreement in 2023. The aim or the target is to have the agreement come into force by 2025, but that, of course, all depends on how many countries sign and ratify the agreement by that time. So the scope of the BBNJ negotiations was agreed way back in 2011. The 2011 package deal really earmarked in particular, and together as a whole, 4 elements. The first was marine genetic resources, or MGRs, including questions on the sharing of benefits. The second was measures such as area-based management tools, or ABMTs, including marine protected areas. Third was environmental impact assessments, EIAs. And the fourth was capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. And these were the 4 topics to be addressed under the agreement. Now, although most CARICOM countries lack the resources and the capacity to actually go out into areas beyond national jurisdiction to conduct exploitative activities, we have to remember that marine areas are fluid, dynamic, and interconnected. Therefore, what happens in marine areas beyond national jurisdiction can obviously have great bearing on the spaces and activities and resources that we make use of within our own national jurisdiction in the process of blue economy development. So with that in mind, let's look at MGRs. in areas beyond national jurisdiction, at the moment, only a few countries really have the financial resources and technical know-how to effectively conduct MGR research. But the BBNJ agreement creates a situation where the benefits arising out of MGR research will be shared instead of it just accumulating to the few who possess the ability to carry out collection and research on MGRs from areas beyond national jurisdiction. The benefits to be shared would be both monetary and non-monetary. Non-monetary benefits may include, for example, allowing developing countries to actually participate on research cruises being carried out, having information and results of scientific research on MGRs be freely shared, and allowing researchers from the developing world facilitated open access to genetic material and information gathered from areas beyond national jurisdiction. Monetary benefit sharing entails the sharing of proceeds resulting from commercialization of products which have been developed from using MGRs and digital sequence information from areas beyond national jurisdiction. And the monetary proceeds will be deposited into a special fund which developing countries can access to fund capacity building. The sharing of these benefits could help us in the Caribbean further develop our capacity to carry out MGR research, for example, for use in developing pharmaceutical products. And this could yet prove to be a viable emerging blue economy sector in the Caribbean. The next element of the agreement, area-based management tools, including MEAs. For this element, the agreement creates a coordinated procedure for proposing, implementing, and managing MEAs and other areas-based management tools in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And Miquel really brought home why this should be important to us. So, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, the leatherback turtle, which nests on many beaches around Trinidad and Tobago, is a perfect example why CARICOM countries would be interested in this aspect of the agreement from a blue economy perspective. These turtles nest on our beaches, but they spend a significant portion of their life migrating through waters in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We would want to ensure that these wonderful creatures that are the basis of local community-based ecotourism, we will want to ensure that they are protected as best as they can be, not only within our waters, but also in international waters. And the BBNJ agreement really provides a mechanism to contemplate and subsequently establish conservation measures, including MEAs, in those areas of the ocean that lie outside of national jurisdiction. So the agreement will really be an important means for us to achieve the global goal agreed under the Convention of Biological Diversity, Global Biodiversity Framework, to protect 30% of the Earth's marine areas by 2030. With respect to environmental impact assessment, which was really my area within the negotiations, currently for many activities, there was no detailed procedure for uniform sets of substantive requirements regarding the conduct of EIA for activities proposed in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And although as I said, it's unlikely that CARICOM countries would be proposing projects in areas beyond national jurisdiction in the near future, we know that because ocean currents provide the means to transport pollutants and other potentially harmful substances from ABNJ into our coastal areas, we really have to be very concerned about what activities are permitted to occur in areas beyond national jurisdiction and ensure that robust EIAs are conducted. So think of sargassum, for example. Although sargassum is a natural occurrence, it is an example of something that originates in international waters and travels through ocean circulation, inundating our coastlines and severely affecting some of our blue economy sectors, such as tourism and fishing. The same mechanisms that transport sargassum can also transport pollutants from activities occurring in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So therefore, we have to be to ensure that high quality EIAs are conducted for activities that will be proposed in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and that really rigorous evaluations of these EIAs occur before these proposed activities are given permission to proceed. The agreement mandates and sets out a procedure for conducting assessments of activities proposed in areas beyond national jurisdiction before they are given permission to proceed, in order to really implement measures to mitigate their potential impacts. And it also mandates subsequent monitoring and review of permitted activities to ensure that these activities continue to have minimal impacts on the environment. The rules under the AIA, under the BBNJ agreement, also encourage public participation and transparency, use of best available science and traditional knowledge, and provides avenues for global oversight and intervention in the process. So this is an excellent thing coming out of the BBNJ agreement. And lastly, capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. This was of huge importance and focus for CARICOM during the negotiations. Capacity building and tech transfer is greatly needed to fulfill our obligations and exercise our rights arising out of the BBNJ agreement. Now, given what the BBNJ agreement entails, capacity building and transfer of marine technology can involve many things, including, for example, assistance in building our indigenous capacities regarding tools and techniques and expertise to conduct marine scientific research, including on marine genetic resources. Capacity building and tech transfer in conceptualizing, implementing, and managing marine protected areas and other area-based management tools. Capacity building and tech transfer in conducting and evaluating EIAs and strategic environmental assessments. And more generally, support will be provided for the creation or enhancement of human financial management, scientific, technological, organizational, and institutional capabilities. The agreement will provide for improved and more robust architecture for capacity building and tech transfer, including a dedicated mandatorily resource fund to finance capacity building activities. So for developing countries, including SIDS, the intention is therefore to have capacity building being guaranteed, accessible, and long-term. And although the agreement deals with areas beyond national jurisdiction, of course, any capacity building and tech transfer would be just as applicable within our areas of national jurisdiction as they would be in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The agreement also creates a number of particular organs, bodies, and mechanisms under it to facilitate effective implementation. I won't go into too much details here because of time limitations, but it does establish a conference of parties, a scientific and technical body, which will also be important in really ensuring that EIAs are properly conducted and area-based management tools are set up. There's a clearinghouse mechanism which will allow for transparency and sharing of information. And there are also a number of committees that will ensure that, for example, capacity building and the transfer of marine technology takes place in an effective manner, and access and benefit sharing under the MGR part of the agreement will also be done in an effective manner. So in closing, I'll just give some insights into the status of the agreement as of present. As of yesterday, when I wrapped up doing this presentation, preparing this presentation, there were 91 signatories to the agreement and 8 ratifications. The 8 ratifications being Chile, Palau, Belize, Seychelles, Monaco, Mauritius, the Federated States of Micronesia, and Cuba. CARICOM states who have signed the agreement are Antigua and Barbuda, Belize, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and of course Belize, who has already gone ahead and ratified the agreement. It would take 60 ratifications for the agreement to actually enter into force. So as I said, we're already at 8. When the agreement enters into force, there are a number of key decisions to be taken at the first and second meetings of the Conference of Parties. And CARICOM member states would therefore wish to have an active presence in these meetings. And to do this, early ratification would be necessary. In the interim, while we wait for the agreement to enter into force, while we're waiting on the 60 ratifications, a preparatory commission has been established to prepare for the entry into force of the BBNJ agreement and to prepare for the convening of the first meeting of the Conference of Parties. In the preparatory commission, as I said, a number of important discussions will be taking place on items that will be decided at the first meeting of the COP. The preparatory commission had an organizational meeting which took place in June, very recently, and it will meet again for 2 sessions next year. CARICOM states intend to fully participate in this preparatory commission. Again, we are still coordinated as a block. So we're maintaining that coordinated approach that has served us really well during the negotiations. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Hassanali. And a quote that you said stood out to me is that marine areas are fluid and interconnected. I love how you laid out that while, you know, some Caribbean countries or people may not think that issues like in the IC may not relate to them, it is actually a very, you know, connected system. And it does affect and matter how we do business here in our region. So now I would love to open up the floor to our participants to ask any questions that they may have. We had 3 really solid and informative presentations, so no doubt it may have got you thinking. Okay, well, I see someone putting something there in the chat. That's fine, but if you have any question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or also send it in the chat. So while we wait for a question from the attendees, Dr. Hassanali, I noticed that a lot of the countries in the Caribbean hasn't become a signatory as yet to the BBNJ. Is there any particular reason why that stands as it is?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Terrell. So I think that all the countries in the Caribbean are very interested in becoming signatories to the BBNJ and going on to ratifying. We have had a few meetings over the last few months to really pick up the pace in this process. But I think what's hindering us at the moment is just that, as we know, the bureaucratic process can be a bit slow, but we are working towards signing and ratifying the agreement. And I can say for Trinidad and Tobago that we are going through this process, and hopefully we'll be signing and moving on to ratification soon.
All right, thanks a lot. So does anyone want to ask a question?
I have a question.
Okay, great.
I have a question. So, Khalil, nice to see you again, bro. I have a question. I didn't follow this part of the BBNJ negotiations, but do you remember, I knew you handled the EIA and somebody else did capacity building and transfer. I can't remember, like, what's the number one thing CARICOM wanted and push for negotiations for the EIA and also the capacity building aspect, if you can remember? No.
Thanks, Joshua. And good to see you again, man. So CARICOM pushed for a number of key things across the entire package of the agreement. With regard to capacity building and tech transfer, CARICOM was really instrumental in getting that capacity building committee established under the agreement. And that capacity building committee is key because we've seen in other multilateral environmental agreements where capacity building is an element, but there has not really been effective implementation of capacity building mechanisms under other multilateral environmental agreements. And we didn't want the BBNJ agreement to fall prey to that. So we established this capacity building committee, which will keep capacity building on the front burner and ensure monitoring and evaluation of progress with regard to capacity building. With regard to environmental impact assessment, what CARICOM was really pushing for was to have effective global oversight in the process. We have achieved this somewhat because what we were initially pushing for is for decision making on environmental impact assessment so decisions on whether activities would proceed or not to be a global decision, but in the cut and thrust of multilateral environmental agreement negotiations, that idea didn't really take hold because there were some particularly developed countries who were resistant to that idea. But what we do have is the scientific and technical body. They have to review EIAs that are produced and provide recommendations. So there is some element of global oversight. And this is particularly important for countries such as Caribbean countries who may lack the capacity and the human resources to really evaluate what will no doubt be very technical EIAs arising out of the BBNJ agreement. So there is some element of global oversight with regard to EIAs.
All right, so there are two questions in the chat. Joshua, one for you. Someone would have asked, what are other ways to help curb problems that can affect an environmental issue when it comes to plastics that I guess can affect animals in the Caribbean and well, just animals in general? So like, I guess what, actions is most effective to curbing pollutions and plastic pollution and so forth?
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah. So so plastic pollution itself is how put it? Plastic pollution is ingrained in various aspects of society. So to give you a brief rundown of how to tackle various sectors, one way this very high level sense is circular economy of plastics. So such as you need to tackle plastics from the upstream, midstream, and downstream aspect of it. So plastic itself is one issue. The mechanical plastic itself, plastic bottles, plastic bags. However, you also look at the composition of plastics regarding you hear me correctly, right? Like properly, right? Okay, great. Yeah. So the composition of plastics themselves come in different forms. Most the main issue plastics that the composition of them, they form from oil and gas compounds and byproducts, which are extremely toxic. Phenols, polyphenols, and other toxic chemicals that once leach into the environment, you currently will eliminate very toxic. So one way to tackle plastics can be maybe creating mandates and outlawing the use of certain chemical compounds in the midstream. Data. We need to look at who's bringing plastics, who's manufacturing plastics, the import of primary plastic polymers to create plastics and track it properly. Because the main issue we have in Trinidad because we don't track plastics. We don't do that. There's been a project currently being done and undertaken, but we haven't done that, and that leads to plastic leakages and other aspects. So tracking plastics. I assume your question really referred to like how people can get involved. One way people can get involved, separate the plastics, recycle. Get a separate bin, put your plastics in it at your home, and you can get in touch with iCare or get in touch with some girls to pick up plastics specifically, clean up your environment and dispose it properly. That's one thing. If you clean it up, I've been on a bunch of cleanups and seen people get plastic bag full of plastic, but just drop it on the beach, it goes back into the environment. So clean the environment properly. Well, from a project standpoint, you'd also use booms to put it floating waterways to catch plastics floating. That's what I did for my thesis as well. I know the Rotary Club, and I think the Ministry of Plan Development is doing a project, I think, regarding that. I think Khalil, I think the MEAs is doing something like that. I could be wrong about that. But I do know that that's been currently being done in Trinidad, looking at the feasibility of using booms to trap plastics. Additionally, there are other different technologies being currently explored, like floating bins and other things like that. But there are multiple ways we could tackle plastics, and it's a multi-stakeholder approach because it's integrated in different aspects of society. So I hope I answered the question. It's a very complicated and complex one, but I go on for a whole day. So yeah, thank you.
Great, you surely did your best. So being conscious of time, we have a few more minutes. I see there are some questions to Dr. Hassanali, and I will ask them in the chat. But a question for Miquel, just to get him in the conversation here. Is the EAG also collaborating with any other organizations around the Caribbean, be it for some of the actions that you all are doing in Antigua and Barbuda to replicate it in other countries, or even like knowledge sharing? Collaboration.
Yeah. So a part of our network, especially with one of our major sponsors and kind of helping hand, Flora and Fauna, they not only help bring consultants and experts over to us to help us be able to do the work and understand what it is we're doing to help standardize all our biosecurity and all our protocols for doing monitoring and everything else. But that's one step, the training for us to have the knowledge. The other step is that as the EAG, we've successfully carried out many of these projects before. So we now have an opportunity to train other islands on how to do it. So through that same network, we've had persons from St. Lucia come to us to learn about how they could possibly run some. We preserved our eraser and were able to get populations up. We've also been teaching other islands how to do snake conservation. In some cases, biosecurity, snake restoration, and ecosystem restoration in general. We do have a lot of regional connectivities with other organizations doing the same type of work where we do a lot of knowledge exchange and sharing. So, yep.
Great stuff. Dr. Hassanali, just two questions to you, and then yes, we'll close off there.
Hello?
So, hello, someone is saying something.
Yes, I wanted to find out what efforts are you working on in terms of reversing the proliferation of Homo consumptive versus Homo conservative. So for instance, I'm in Tobago, right? And we have, say for instance, these fetes that go on. So for instance, I just had one a few weeks ago at Pigeon Point, which is one of the most beautiful beaches in the Caribbean. But what you have there is the target audience is the up and coming school leavers, or the so-called the leaders or the community leaders of the future. But their lesson from that day or that weekend on the beach is utter destruction of the environment. So they leave the beautiful, most beautiful beach looking like a labasse, where all the plastic, the bottles, the wires, the screws, the condoms, and just a complete mess. So
Yeah, so
how
I'm
will
sorry to
that?
interrupt you, Mr. Moore, but I think I will give because we're very conscious of time, and the Crupper Foundation also has another event after this. So we'll also need to give access to the Zoom for that. But Miquel, could you give an example of how you probably approach the stuff that Mr. Moore would have raised in Antigua and Barbuda through the EAG?
Okay, so as far as understanding the question, it's about how do we properly manage our beautiful areas in terms of having people coming in and using it, throwing a party and then dumping their waste. So for us, a lot of what we do is we do a lot of on the ground work and we bring people into the ecosystems we work in. We have a few huge education programs within locally. So we have a into the wild process where we worked with the government of Antigua and Barbuda and we did everything possible to teach them about mangroves, Antigua racers, the offshore islands. We shot everything, did everything locally. We did another of that series on coral reefs. So just by having that impact on all of the schools, you have people now understanding, okay, me doing something in this ecosystem, a beach is an ecosystem environment. It has a lot of biodiversity. It is a area that needs to be managed and protected to have it for the long term. So through education, advocacy, and awareness is our main tackle towards stuff like that. And then from the legislative side of things, that's our bottom-up approach. From the legislative side of things, through our monitoring, wildlife monitoring, engagement with endangered species and protected areas, we also have the area of the government to say, okay, these areas are especially sensitive. We already have the key biodiversity areas that set out this, and now we also have data to prove that this is an area that needs a special type of protection or extra legislative power to say, okay, maybe you can't just throw any random party, or there has to be certain types of follow-ups that you have to put in place. So it's both those approaches we take to safeguarding the environment for the long term.
Great. And so I'm seeing Dr. Hassanali, just one last question. If you could probably just in 30 seconds answer it. Has there been any discussion, and this is from Ms. Adiola Long, has there been any discussion on involving sociologists or social scientists in the negotiations for research access and collaboration?
Thanks, Cyril, and thanks, Adiola. So yeah, I think there has been an increasing recognition over the years that traditionally what you found is that not many natural scientists are engaged in these types of negotiations, but there has been an increasing recognition over the years that all types of scientists, including social scientists, are integral to informing the negotiations and also integral to also resolving key sticking points within the negotiations. So there has been great involvement in the BBNJ agreement negotiations by social scientists, and we can really hope that progression continues to be made with regard to involving all different types of knowledge systems and all different types of science as well in negotiating processes.
All right. So thanks a lot, Dr. Hassanali. Thank you, everyone. I know we could continue speaking for the rest of the day, but I really wanna, respect my colleagues who also have another event to host in just a few minutes. I saw Joshua would have sent his email in the chat. What we will do is provide everyone with an email of resources. If you are familiar with the webinar, we send a recap email where you could get in contact with all the presenters and so forth. So you'll also have the opportunity to email them. We will be having other sessions, and I just want to tease one that will be coming in a few weeks. It's a young conservationist from the Cayman Islands who's doing a lot of great work there, and they also did some biodiversity protection during Hurricane Beryl. So that will be our second lunchtime convo with Cari-Bois session. I saw Miquel also share his stuff. So thank you. Please enjoy the rest of the day and look forward to the recap email. Again, you could feel free to reach out to all the presenters. So please enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks so much for turning out. It is our most attended session. I also should note that. So I really appreciate that.
Happy,
Bye,
bro.
everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
thanks for having us.
And thanks, Cari-Bois.
All right, take care.